Well, I
Go
think we'll go
Meadow.
ahead and get started, and I'll keep admitting people as I see them come in. My name is Ann Nault, and I am one of the school counselors at Meadowdale High School. And I've had the good fortune of attending conferences where Dave Morris has been speaking, and found him to be an invaluable resource, not only for those of us working with kids, but also families as well. Dave is the founder and CEO of College Athletic Advisor and has spent over 20 years assisting prospective athletes, families, and colleges navigate the athletic recruiting process. Um, and drawing from his own experience as an educator, administrator, and coach at every NCAA level, high school, and elite sport clubs. I can say for myself, having worked with high school athletes and having my own children consider participating at the college level, I find every presentation I attend regarding recruiting to be invaluable. So I hope that you get a lot of good information tonight. The variations on how each sport recruits athletes, understanding paid recruiting agencies, as well as your own coaches. Working with college coaches can be overwhelming. And I find that Dave will kind of put this all in perspective and will teach us all how to work with our athletes. So thank you, Dave, for your willingness to be here with us tonight. And I will be monitoring the chat as we go through this. So if you have questions, you can type them in there. But Dave has also said that he is willing to just have you raise your hand, and we can try to answer questions as we go. All right. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Well, thank you. First of all, I wasn't necessarily expecting this many people, but we'll do it. So that's awesome. I'm so excited. Also, one of my relatives is a Meadowdale senior, so I'm very excited.
Oh,
So,
nice.
You
I don't
said
think
what?
she's here. I don't think Violet's here. So, she's a volleyball player. We're very excited about her. But anyway, uh, first of all, it's a
Uh,
pleasure. And so, in my background, I coached at every
advisor,
level, and
Which
we
one?
can mute people
Advisor
too
that
here.
had a meeting at the
And
school, but I was able to get into the Zoom.
um, there you go. Uh, and I've coached at every level and in every time zone, which my wife will tell you is not as impressive as it sounds.
It's probably
Uh,
pretty cool.
but thanks, Anne, for that
Yes.
introduction. Uh, as we get going, so this is just stuff that you should know playing in playing in college, but you're playing in high school, and what does that do to your college search, and how can that help you? And so, before we get too into the weeds, I just want to point out the enormity of intercollegiate athletics. There's over 2,000 intercollegiate athletic programs at the collegiate level. And what that means is if you're a varsity athlete, you can play in college. And the other thing that it means is that, if you watch ESPN or, talk to people, you only have a very small window into what it looks like to be an athlete these places. And we're going to talk about three myths in recruiting later, but I think the biggest misinformation that students hear is this idea that you really need to decide you want to play in college before you get involved in the recruiting process. That that is a level of that is some of the worst advice you could ever give a human being. I mean, it's just you can't do that. The purpose of the athletic recruiting process is to figure out what playing in college would look like for you. Because you can't know until you go through the recruiting process. You don't know what's out there. I mean, like being a football player at UW and being a golfer at Grinnell are both cool, but they're different. And if you don't take the opportunity to go through the recruiting process, you don't know what's out there for you because your opportunity is based on you. And what you want and we want to center you in the recruiting process, right? It's about you, not about the colleges, not about the coaches, not about your club. It's you, it's your life. Uh, so the big myth is that you gotta be all in on athletics and playing in college before you get into recruiting. That's terrible advice. you want to use the recruiting process to find out what this is going to look like for you, and also how what you're doing now in high school can benefit you in terms of looking at colleges. Even if you never get, a scholarship offer or any particular recruiting interest, if you reach out to coaches and you visit some schools, you're going to meet your peers, kids who are a year or two older than you who've been through this process, and they'll talk about the questions they asked, where, how happy they are with where they landed, what their plans are, what questions they wish they'd asked. You're going to be a far better college searcher because you went through the recruiting process than you would be otherwise. And of course, if you find a match and there's a school that really wants you, you may already know you're admitted before you ever apply, which is, it's so cool. Washington State's using it as a marketing tool, right? But it is really cool. And even at very selective schools, they'll do what's called a pre-read and they'll get your transcript. And you should take advantage of that. You can get a financial pre-read, find out what you're going to pay to go to college, because people think that they're going to have to pay some number that you see online, and very often that's not the case. So you find out not just what the opportunity looks like for you, not just that you can be admitted, but then also, what college is going to cost you specifically. And that's huge. And to miss out on that because you feel like you got to decide to play in college before you even start the process, to me, that's a sign of insanity. I mean, to be blunt, like you want to go through the recruiting process and see what's out there for you and then decide whether you want to play. You can even at most college athletes can walk away from their team and it doesn't change anything about their educational. They're still paying the same price. They're still at the same school. Uh, and that's totally as a college coach. I was a college coach for 23 years. I coached in Division One, Two, Three, NAIA, and JCA. And I will tell you that as a college coach, every year you have kids decide they're not going to continue. And what every coach understands is the minute you picked up a ball, a racket, jumped in the pool, there was a day you were going to stop competing. And every coach has watched players wrestle with that. And there's no one, in most cases, there's no one more sympathetic than a college coach as you go through that process. So college coaches are shockingly supportive when you feel like you've hit the end of the line. I retired like 5 times, so I know the process. Uh, but it's really important to understand that the biggest myth out there is that you need to decide about whether you're going to play in college before you get involved in this process, and that is 100% backwards. So let's talk about what going through the recruiting process means, right? You're playing sports at your high school. Well, the first phase, and that might be when you're a freshman or sophomore, or whenever you get interested, watch some games. And hopefully not just on ESPN. If you live in Seattle, you can go watch a game at University of Puget Sound, um, or wherever, and you should take advantage of watching, go to Western Washington, watch a D2 game. Uh, go to Puget Sound or Pacific Lutheran or Evergreen State or wherever, and, see what it looks like for those students to play intercollegiate athletics. Go visit, if you decided, oh, I want to look at the Ivy League schools, go watch a game in Jadwin Gym at Princeton. It's cool. I'm telling you, I've done it. It's fun. And when you're there, don't just watch the game. Reach out to coaches. Say, hey, I'm going to be on your campus. It'd be great to say hi. Um, look around the stands. If you're looking around the stands and you're thinking, man, these kids look super cool. The students here, they look like people I want to look like when I grow up. Well, you're in a pretty good spot for yourself. If you look around and you think, man, these kids look kind of weird. I wouldn't want to hang out with them. Well, you're probably not at the right school, right? Totally okay. There's only 2,000 options. Uh, the next phase is where you start trying to reach out to coaches and get feedback. And you want to try to figure out first, you have to assess what you want, and then you reach out and you see what you get back and how what you want aligns with the opportunities that exist for you. If you want to play SEC football or Big Ten football, you got to write some SEC Big Ten coaches and find out what they got to say. If they don't respond or they say, hey, you're not really a fit, then, okay, but there's some great opportunities. There's guys playing in the Super Bowl every year who played in Division III. Uh, People, I think, in the Pacific Northwest, there's so few Division two and three colleges out here that people don't understand the opportunity and how much fun it is to play sports in those environments and how good those players are. And so getting out and taking an affirmative step or two to discover that is really important. And we'll talk about, there's ways you can reach out to coaches that really help them respond to you, and there's ways that sort of discourage those responses. And we'll talk about that. The final phase of exploring the opportunity, coaches start asking for your transcript. They want to see, your grades. Can we get you in? You can really evaluate what the student experience is like because you talk to students and faculty on these campuses. You get to understand the cost at a more granular level than your peers do. You could know what college will cost for you before the start of your senior year if you're pretty seriously being recruited. Most of your peers don't know until they get a financial aid letter back, February, March of their senior year. And you have a much better window into academic fit, and what do you want to study, all those things. But you need to get on it earlier because you may end up having to pick a school before your peers. So, when do you get going? And the answer is now. You hear a lot about, oh, there's NCAA rules and the coaches, you can't talk to coaches till you're a junior or whatever, depending on your sport. Varies a little bit. Hockey players can start talking second semester of their sophomore year, baseball players not till September 1 of their junior year. Look, there's no rule for you. You can email a coach any day of the week, any time of your life. There's no penalty. A coach cannot recruit you. In NCAA parlance, that's a specific rule with a specific meaning. It means that, the coach at Washington State can't say, come on out here and be a Coug to a sophomore in most sports, right? But if you ask them a question, they can answer a question like, what qualities do they look for in a point guard or an attacking midfielder or, whatever. What times excite them in track recruiting, what do they, if you're running this fast as a sophomore, what do they expect you to be able to do by the time you're a senior? Or what times were the current student athletes running or swimming or whatever, when they were your age? You can ask a lot of different questions. What's it like to be a student athlete at Oregon State, and get some answers. And then you're having a conversation with a college coach. That's nothing but valuable. The other thing is, where can I play? And I think, to be really honest, realism is the enemy at the beginning of the athletic recruiting process. Figure out what your dream is, email that coach. Nobody knows. There's only one person in the universe who knows whether you can play at Stanford, and it's the Stanford coach in your sport. That's the flat out truth. And every day I see student athletes get recruited, like one kid at Stanford, when they got told no by, smaller Division three schools. Uh, it happens. Talent evaluation is not a science, it's an art, and you never know. The person who knows is that coach. They know what they need, they know what they're looking for, they're building a roster, and if they get it wrong, they get fired. So they take it really seriously. Don't ask, and I'm very confused by this. People want to ask, your high school coach, your club coach, the guy down the street, your aunt, your uncle. None of those people know the current roster at a school. None of those people know that like their left tackle just got in the transfer portal and now they're really kind of trying to hustle to find a left tackle and you're a left tackle. You'll never know that unless you ask the college coach. How hard is it to do that? It is super easy. Their emails are on the internet. You just email them. It's easy. And people say, well, what about using social media and all that? And we could get into the weeds on that. But the reality is, every one of those coaches has a boss. And if their boss wants them, do you think they tweet at them or you think maybe they just send them an email? So they're checking their email. Send them an email. And we'll talk about how to do that. And, whether it's a recruiting service or any of these other, a club coach can say, well, we had this kid and he went to, or she went to this school and you look like her or you don't. And they can guess. And guessing is great. If you're a college counselor and kid says, "Can I get into Harvard?" You can't call Harvard and say, "Hey, listen, will you take this kid?" Harvard laughs, right? They'd be like, "Well, there's a process for that. You fill out the application. We take like 3 months, and then we send you an email." Uh, if you're an athlete, You email the coach, and the coach, if he wants you, the coach can say, "Give me your transcript," walk back in that admissions room and say, "Can I have this kid?" and get an answer like in a week. It's amazing. I don't know why people wouldn't want to take advantage of that. And your club coach, your high school coach, they're all great people, but they can't possibly know whether you can play it at one of 2,000 colleges because they can't know all the variables. It's literally impossible. I do this all day long and I don't know either. I know to ask the people who matter. So that brings us to kind of our next step, which is, what are the myths, right? The first one is the idea that coaches will find you. You don't have to do anything. If you're good enough, a coach will find you. I'm very sorry to tell you that that is not the case. The coach walking out of the stands, that's like in the movies. In reality, coaches really want to hear from you. Think of it this way. You could be playing in some tournament or running in a track meet or whatever it is, right? And it's the biggest meet and the college coaches are there, right? Think about what college coaches experience as they walk in the door or walk through the gate to the field or whatever. And there's a million fields and there's a million kids. And who are they going to watch? Well, they got to start with people who've already contacted them, who they know are interested. They've got to evaluate those people first. Why wouldn't you want to be in that group? Why do you want to just hope they somehow, I don't know, fall over you? How many college coaches come to a game at a high school? It just isn't really possible most of the time. There's 17,000 high schools, and for most sports at most colleges, there's maybe one or two people doing the recruiting. So there's no way to cover everything. The second thing is the idea that college coaches can't talk to you. We've discussed that. The third one, I just really think is the idea of waiting. I don't want to reach out because I think I'm going to have a better time next month. I'm waiting until the championship when I show there is never an advantage to waiting. Go ahead, do it today. Reach out. Worst thing that can happen is the coach doesn't, you know, the worst thing that happens, coach doesn't respond, right? And email him again. There's no law that says you can't email him twice. College coaches do not hold it against you if you email them twice. I promise. So, understand that in order to center yourself, you need to think about it in an organized way, where you want to go to school. Like I get kids every day, hey, I want to play at UW. Okay, great. Tell me about an English class with 500 kids in it. Oh, I don't want to be in a class like that. I don't want to be in a big class. Well, then you can't, you don't want to play at UW because they're going to make you go to that class. Let's find a school that has a smaller English class where you can play. Um, and that next step is, I think of it as three tough calls. There's three areas that are really hard for high school kids and for parents to manage, right? You've got to make hard decisions and there's no super easy answers, right? The first one is outside teams. In most sports, most recruiting happens outside of the high school, football being the big exception. And you've got to figure out how to compete where college coaches can see you play or where you can get data. If you're a track athlete, you got to figure out where can you run where college coaches can see your results, right? Not and high school can help, but there's a lot of opportunities in sort of AAU track and things like that. It doesn't mean spending the maximum amount of money to travel all the time and do all this stuff, but it does mean thinking about, can I guest play? How do I get into a basketball live period event? What do I need to do so the coaches I care about can see me play in a competitive environment against the best possible opponents, right? So that's very specifically not a camp. So let's get to the second part. There's an entire industry of camp, right? And pay to play and college coaches. I was a college coach. I got the free sandwich and $100 to go sit there and look like I was paying attention. And those events exist. They're very difficult for college coaches in terms of evaluation. I advise people, you hear about these ID camps where they bring in all these coaches from all over the place. It's usually assistant coaches, and they're paying them, they're compensating those guys. And my concern is number one, they're not watching the highest level of competition, so they're not super interested. Somebody looks really impressive, but they're not playing at the level you want them to be playing at just because of who their opponents are. And then on top of it, I'm the assistant coach. Maybe the head coach isn't even going to listen to me, you know? So I got to be really careful about who I recommend. If you're going to go to a camp or a clinic, I would be very, very biased about doing it on a college campus. I think if your club has a college night, you ought to go because it's good to support your club or whatever and do it. Some college coaches show up, that's great. But if you really love UW or Harvard or whatever, Middlebury, go to a camp there. Meet the coaches, meet some of the players, see the facilities. You'll have a better idea of what it's like to play at that school. The other part of it is watch the players, the students, when the coach walks in. How's the vibe change? Like, what's the relationship there? That's something I think, you want to know as a prospective student athlete is like, what's that coach really like? They're all pretty friendly when they're recruiting, and, it gets a little more serious. So you can use those ID camps, but, if you're going to one every weekend, you're just running yourself ragged, and I'm not sure there's much benefit. And if you haven't talked to the coach ahead of time, it's very difficult for that ID camp to move the needle in terms of recruiting. Uh, Finally, the third tough call, this is not a tough call. It's just an annoying call. And that is recruiting services. You're going to get, if you're playing at a WIA member institution, or you're playing AAU, or you're playing club soccer or anything else where you have to register with a national governing body, which is everybody, those recruiting services are going to buy your name and they're going to call you a million times. And coaches really don't like those recruiting services. They're all about churn. They are a time suck for coaches, and they really recommend not doing it. Um, the value to a recruiting service, if you really have no idea what you want, you'll get emails from some college in Kansas you've never heard of, and since you don't care what you want, like that's a pretty good way to find a school, I guess. Um, that's kind of the best I can do about that. But for most students, the recruiting services are absolutely, number one, not necessary. Number two, they're a negative because you'll get data and churn that you'll get a bunch of camp invites that you don't need. You get stuff like, oh, 50 people looked at my profile. I don't know how I was a college coach. I can tell you, I had kids tell me, well, you looked at my profile. I'm like, I promise I didn't. Because it's churn. I don't know what they count as a view. When my spam filter deleted an email, was that a view? I can't speak to that. But also, if you use a recruiting service, do not ever use their email system. Those emails are spoofed. They get filtered out as spam, and college coaches will not know you reached out to them. The other thing I'll say is if you think a college coach looked at your recruiting service profile and they didn't call you and they're not in your living room, I'm a little concerned about why you'd think that's good news because it doesn't sound like interest to me. It sounds like that would mean they evaluated you and it's bad news. Um, I'm looking at the chat and there's some questions about recording. I'm not sure we're recording this. Um, I'd ask Ann, she is the host, you may be able to do that.
It says
Uh,
it's recording,
oh, it
Dave.
says it's recording. Oh, then it's
Yeah.
recording. All right, then that's a win.
We'll
Okay.
have to delete our little chat ahead of time, but
I'll edit,
um,
yeah, if it
okay. And
downloads.
Dave, one question that's here is with
Yeah.
Athletic Net monopolizing all the performance data, do coaches and recruiters simply manage through that rack and stack publicly free available ranking?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. And they don't. Like athletic.net is big in some states and MileSplit's big in others. So it's not a complete data set at all, just so you know. I think athletic.net tends to be big in Washington. That's what coaches use, but there's a lot of states where they use MileSplit. So they're all kind of incomplete. So it's tough. Um, so let's talk about the difference. This other part is, I want to go D1, right? I want to go D1 or I want to go D3. Why do you want to go D3? Well, I think, it's not as serious. Um, I coached in every division, and I'll tell you, number one, my life didn't change. We practiced the same, 6 days during the season. The rules are the same pretty much for every division. So you practice most days, you play a couple days a week, or you go to track meets on the weekends, whatever that is. It's by sport. And the reality is, if you think about it, there's no place, like this from high school. What's the league where you don't have to train, you just get off the couch and you can win the league? or be successful or even get to play and get off the bench. Where's that league? It doesn't exist, right? It certainly doesn't exist in college. So, whether you're playing in Division One or Division Two or Division Three, the reality is the games are super competitive. Kids want to win because they're on a team and they're playing this other team. And man, you don't like those guys from whatever, like you can still get me going if you bring up the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire. I coached at Wisconsin Stout down the street. We hated those guys. I mean, in a good way, but we hated them. And, I still like to beat them. And, that was Division Three. We played just as hard there as we played when I coached at Wisconsin Green Bay in Division One. There's literally no difference. Um, the other uh, the other piece of that is that you got to train in the off season if you want to win, right? You got to get stronger, you got to get faster, you've got to get more explosive, you got to get more skillful. The difference in the divisions really comes in how the off season is structured. In Division One, the off season is highly structured, and the coach has a good deal of influence. They can say, okay, the season's over, but we're practicing at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, and you better be there. Uh, Division Three, there's very limited coach run training in the off season. Like in basketball and winter sports that go 2 semesters, there's no official Division Three like off season training. Uh, in like a fall sport like soccer, you have a very limited like 5 week spring season. You get one game. It's very limited. Meanwhile, Division One, they get 100 and something training days. They train all year and they play off season. They play 5 off season matches or something. I mean, there's a full schedule even in the off season. In Division Three, you really depend on your captains to run training as peers. So the coach trains the team. This is what our expectations are, and then the peers have to enforce that, and you've got to be responsible. And but the truth comes out, man. If you don't train in the off season, somebody just gets your spot. You get out competed, you get beat out, and you don't get to play as much. So, and you know that in high school, right? There's high school kids that don't really work that hard. And eh, like then somebody takes somebody can beat them out if they want to work harder. So it's really important to understand that, if you're self-motivated and you really enjoy training with your peers and not having to worry about a coach, Division Three is a better fit for you. If you really like the coach holding everybody accountable, Division One or Two is probably a better fit. Division Two, the NAI are kind of betwixt and between, right? They're more training than D3 with the coach, but not as much as Division One. So you need to understand that there are no limits on how much you train at any. No, I don't care where you go to college. You can go to McAllister, Puget Sound, University of Oregon. There, you can train as much as you want any of those places. The only limits are on what the coach can make you do. And ultimately, if you want to be successful, you're probably going to work a little harder than most coaches are going to ask you to work, to be totally honest. And that brings us to that fourth thing. Will college sports take all my time? Because I think, man, you read a lot about how college athletes spend 40 hours a week doing their sport and all. And as a college coach who's seen it and heard people talk about this, as your players are saying, oh, we're spending so much time. And they're not wrong, right? But there's also like they're talking about time where they walk to dinner from the dorm. Like, okay, it's time and you're with your teammates for sure. But like, is that practice time? It isn't. So the reality is every sport has a 20-hour week limit. Most teams don't hit the limit. D1 football hits the limit. Most sports really don't get to 20 hours uh, unless you start counting the stuff that's not countable, like travel time. If you fly across the country, that's a couple hours, right? It's going to add up. But the reality is, um, there's plenty of time to play your sport, train seriously, be successful, and even have a job. People do it and they're successful. And then they go on, one of my favorite former students, you know, was an all conference player, 4.0 student, held down a job for 20 hours a week, maybe 10 during the season, but then 20 in the off season, and went to medical school. So it is definitely doable. And I hear people say all kinds of crap. Oh, you can't be an engineer and be a college athlete. And I think like, well, if that's true, what's Purdue doing? I mean, I don't understand that. So the reality is you can do it and you don't have to be Superman to do it. Like the biggest problem most kids have when they go to college is they have too much free time. You go from 30 hours a week in school now, right? You go for about 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And in college, a full load is 15 to 17 credits. That's 15 to 17 hours of class. You live on campus, so you don't drive to campus, right? You live there, you roll out of bed, you go to class. You've got all this extra free time. Even with practice, it's now if you practice, right, you have 30 hours a week of school and then you go practice after school. So you leave, for school at 7 in the morning, you don't get home till like 5, 6 o'clock at night, right? Maybe later. And if there's a game. And in college, in between classes, you got all kinds of free time. Then you practice, you know, and then you walk to the dorm and you got dinner waiting for you and everything else. I mean, you're going to have more time in college than you think. I understand being concerned about it, but what I would say is, why do colleges have, like, why does the University of Washington have a tennis team? Do they care about tennis? Have you ever heard the Husky president talk about how important tennis is to the education of America's youth or something? Like you haven't. The reason they have tennis is because having a tennis team is a bunch of guys who uh, are retained at a higher rate, their grades are better than their peers, and they graduate at a higher rate in the end, and then they give back more money because they're more successful alumni. Same with track, same with basketball, same with every sport they run. The reason colleges have these teams is because it is the best academic support program and the most cost-effective academic support program they've ever invented. So college sports writ large are not going anywhere. And it's because they benefit students and they benefit colleges. Uh, so, one other thing about levels, and I can share this data with you in other ways, but basically I like set up the power ratings for how many teams have different power ratings in different NCAA divisions. And I just put soccer on here because it's a pretty typical example. And you can see on the women's side, it's a little more spread out. On the men's side, virtually every college soccer program is within one standard deviation. So there's very little difference in talent. There's Division 3 teams that are better than a lot of Division 1 teams. Same for women, right? There's Division 3 teams in here, and there's plenty of Division 1 teams back in here. And that's just the reality. And so if you think like, oh, well, Division 1 is better than Division 2, there's a bigger difference between the top and the bottom of any division than there is between the good teams in all the divisions. So how do you figure out where you fit? And I did see a chat question I want to make sure I hit. Um, yeah, with so colleges can now pay cash to student athletes, right? Division 1, if you opt into the house settlement, there's about 120 schools that have opted into the house settlement, and they're paying cash to student athletes on top of scholarships and stuff. It's not a zero-sum game. They're not taking the money, and it wouldn't help, right? Since they don't pay athletes in tennis at most schools, say, or certainly not most tennis players, they can't take tennis player money and spend it, paying a football player $100,000. You got to go raise the 100 grand. Um, it's not that I don't think any student athletes are losing scholarship opportunities. There's just additional stuff going to revenue sports at that at that top 100 colleges. Remember, there's 2,000 colleges and we're talking about the top 100. So there's 1,900 colleges where there was no change whatsoever. So it's not making it harder for you. I think it's kind of the pie problem. You think, well, if this guy's pie slice is bigger than mine and will be smaller, the reality is they're not cutting up the same pie. There's a lot of pies. He can get a big piece. The piece for you is still going to be about the same. So might even be bigger because we've made more pies because athletics is making more money. And I think you got to look at it as for a long time, the colleges were bringing in $1 billion and they weren't paying anybody anything in like the basketball tournament. And now they have to share the money. So there's more money in the system for students. And I think that's a better way to think of it. Um, so how do you figure out where you fit? And to me, it starts with an email, right? So what goes into the email? The first thing is the subject line. You need a subject line that makes the coach want to click on it. If you put Susie Smith 2024 grad, they're going to think it's spam and they're going to delete it. You got to put all conference Tiddlywinks player or whatever it is, right? Something that indicates that you might be someone who could help them win. Because when a coach gets an email, the first question they're asking is this someone who might help us win? Because if the answer is no, they really want to delete that email, right? They have to kind of triage. They get a lot of emails coming in, and if they don't think you can help them, they need to get to the next kid. So something that makes them think that you might be able to help them. I averaged 15 points a game in basketball. Um, I led my team in kills or whatever it is. You know, your track, what's your PR in the 400 if you're a runner, right? Or a swimmer, or whatever. That goes in the subject line. They also need your grad year and your GPA. And your GPA is your cumulative GPA. I cannot tell you how upset it made me as a college coach when a kid says, I have a 3.8, and then you look at their transcript and it's like 2.7, and you're like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, I got a 3.8 this quarter. Well, nobody cares about that. So it's a cumulative GPA. And by the by, here it is from a college coach. Every tenth of a point you add to your GPA gives you more options, better options, and cheaper options in college, right? If you go from 2.7 to 2.8, more options, better options, cheaper options. Same thing if you go from 3.8 to 3.9. All right. Um, but the first thing is that subject line. If the coach doesn't click on the email, you're kind of out of luck, right? Doesn't really matter what's in there. What goes in the email? First sentence, something that indicates you're emailing that coach specifically. So get the school name right, get the coach's name right. I'm a big fan of putting in a potential academic major because you can go to their website and pick a major. And then the coach knows that you've done a little research and you know that that college has that major. Because I can't tell you how often college coaches get emails to say, hey, I want to be a business major if they don't have a business program, or I want to be a bio major and they don't have a bio program, or I want to be nurse and they don't have a nursing program. Like, that kid didn't do their homework, makes them less attractive as a recruit, right? The second sentence really makes the coach the star. Ask the coach to assess your fit and give you feedback, right? And explain what you're going to give them so they can do that. What can you give them? One thing you can do is give them a resume. If you go to we'll talk about it. You can go to my website, download a resume template, save it as a PDF, attach it that way, give them a resume, right? If you have an online resume from your club, that works. I would not use, like, if you're using a recruiting service resume, you got problems, I would avoid that. That's not best practice. But if, like, you have an ECNL resume or something, that could be okay. And then video, right? Because it's 2025. If there's not video of it, it didn't happen. So in most sports, you need video. The exception would be sports like track, where you've got a time. Share the link directly to your athletic.net profile or your SwimCloud profile or whatever has the data, your UTR in tennis, that gives college coaches an understanding. That goes in that second line. The third sentence is a question. Ask the coach a good question, not pick me. Do not ask them like, pick me, pick me. They get a million of those, and obviously it's tiresome. Nobody likes that. And think about this. When's the last time you read an email from a complete stranger that was more than 3 or 4 sentences? If you're a student, I know the answer, right? It's never. If you're an adult, you used to do it, but you probably don't do it anymore. So you don't really want to get past 3 sentences. Ask a question. First sentence, make sure they know you're emailing them specifically and not 200 schools because nobody wants that. Then ask them to assess your fit, make the coach the star of the email, and then ask a good question. And then sign off and make sure your name and your cell number are at the bottom. Easy peasy. If you've got video, in terms of highlight reels, you want to make a highlight reel that's less than a minute. A minute's about the maximum. They're going to watch the first 4 clips. So make sure your first 4 clips are the best. Your best clip first. When the coach hits play, you dunk on LeBron James. The ball bounces off his head. Coach goes, I need that guy, right? Easy. That's easy. Best thing you ever did is clip one, right? But your best 7, 8 clips, about a minute long. Volleyball, you can squeeze a couple extra clips in there because they're short. But get that in there. Make sure your 2K time is in there if you're a rower, whatever it is. But with video, make sure when the coach hits play, you play. You don't start with a slide or like, hi, I'm Bob or any of those things. You coach hits play, you play. Run your name at the bottom or the top. And every clip, make sure you got a circle or an arrow or something so the coach knows who you are in each clip without doing any thinking. If you make a coach play like Sherlock Holmes to figure out which little blip you are, you're probably out of luck, right? You got him that far, he clicked the video, make sure he has no excuse not to see you. One of my favorite exchanges ever on Facebook, and I've been doing this a long time. Parents said, but come on, man, nobody ever got a scholarship from a highlight reel. And I laughed and I said, you're not totally wrong about that. Coaches want to see you play in person. But you walk up to like a soccer tournament as a college coach, and there's 35 fields, and there's a game on that field every 90 minutes for 8 hours. How do you figure out which which kids to watch, right? It's because you like their highlight reels. So you need a good highlight reel, the best one you can make that shows you, right? Um, and make sure those first 4 clips, because that's what people watch. After the first 4 clips, I'm not sure they watch much. All right. I want to make sure you've got my contact information on here. Uh, so if you have questions that we don't get to tonight, or you want to email me, ask something else a little more personal, I'm here. That's my cell number. You can call me anytime, text me. I'm here for you. All right. And then the website, collegeathleticadvisor.com. And I'm going to show you on the website where you can download a couple things that I think will help you. So let me stop sharing the presentation.
Hey, thank you very much, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. So if you go to the website here, one of the places, hit I'm an educator, and you can download the resume. This is the resume template right here. Save it to your personal Google Drive and then play with it. Okay, don't try to type it in here because it'll reset. Uh, Same thing with the email template. We just talked through it. Here it is as a Google Drive document you can play with. All right, easy stuff. Um, And then there's other information about recruiting services, graphics about the house settlement, some of the other stuff, how to upload a video to YouTube and start your YouTube channel. And then there's all kinds of stuff. If you go home, we've got the newsletter that comes out every month or so, various things. And there's plenty of videos if you want, like if you want to know about camp and what I think about camp, and how to approach those types of issues, I've got all kinds of stuff on that. So feel free, follow me on social media, YouTube, um, what is it? YouTube, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, all that fun stuff. And it is my pleasure. So I want to make sure you guys have been really quiet. What kind of you have any questions? I just yacked at you for however long, and I
Looks
really
like
appreciate
Carly has
it.
a question.
Go for it, Carly.
Hi there. Thank you. Very informative. I appreciate it. Oh, my video's not working. Um, oh, there we go. So I have a freshman son, but what I hear you saying is that now is the time to start doing this process. But in my mind, as a mom, I'm like, he's going to reach out to these coaches and they're just going to be like, talk to you in 4 years, dismiss.
Well, they're not going to talk to him in 4 years because it's too
Okay.
late by then. I mean, I think, reach out, understand that, you're going to get back what you get back, right?
Okay.
But I think, what you're really trying to do right now as a freshman, his focus should be high school, right? But since, you get through the recruiting process, you may have to make a decision by May of your junior year. You've only got 2 more summers. So you
Okay.
want to be strategic about using this time to get out and see things to make the whole process more concrete.
Okay.
So the first thing is like just asking coaches, what do you look for in a prospective student athlete? Where do you go watch students? so I can think about where I'm competing
Oh, I
and
see.
whether I'm
Okay.
going to get there.
Got it.
But yeah, you're not asking like pick me. I mean, coach is going to like
No.
you're 14, right? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
They're gonna be like, you shaving yet? If you're shaving yet, maybe we should talk, right? Uh, but you want to get baseline information because that you've got to start to narrow sooner than you think. You got to start to figure out what your universe of options is if you want to play your sport in college
Okay. Great.
or more sports multiple. Mark's in the chat saying, would you critique a highlight video? Absolutely. By the way, not live, but I will. If you email a link to it, I'll definitely give you feedback. Any other? I promise, I rarely bite or anything. Anne's seen my stuff, so
Yeah.
she's seen me before. Do this. I promise I won't embarrass you. I know you got like people have to have questions.
There's 69 people still sitting on the Zoom,
Yeah,
so
everybody's
feel
watching
free
with
to
bated
ask
breath.
away.
How relevant do you see, SAT scores in this whole bigger picture? Because it used to be
Um,
like, did you do athletics? What are your grades? What are your SATs? And that's the yes no gate.
yeah, now it's really GPA. I always ask, what math class are you in? Rigor is really important because there's schools, and I don't know where Meadowdale is on this, but there are schools where you could have a 3.8 GPA and you're not in the top half of the class. So that makes GPA a little bit squishy. SAT scores are more, if you're trying to go to the Ivy League, if you're looking at, some of the elite engineering schools, then SAT scores become more important. If you're really focused on like UC schools and Cal States, they're not going to look at it. So SAT scores are going to vary depending on what you want. You want to go to college in Florida, you better have an SAT score.
And another question I have is like, I mean, everybody obviously wants to be Division One, the top of the top, the best of the best. But from like what little I've learned, there's some of these state school systems like UT. Of course, everyone wants to go to UT Austin, but there's a huge system of other schools throughout Texas in the UT system, different campuses, not the top. They're not on TV. It's
Well,
not.
and yeah, I think people mistake visibility for being the best. UT Austin's great, right? But obviously it's not that great. They just got their butt kicked by Georgia. And having
They're
been
so
both places,
uber
UGA,
competitive. That's like to
yeah,
get
UGA is
UT.
really nice. But the other part is there's other like, different years and in different sports, Middlebury or Amherst will have a better team than Texas does. Because look, University of Vermont won the national title in men's soccer. Like if money mattered, they wouldn't. But they did. So there's more to it. But the other part is, I think worrying about the visibility of school is uh is really getting it backward. You got to think about what you want and not like, oh, I want the biggest, the most famous, but like, what do you really want? Do you want to go to college in Austin, Texas? Because you could go to UT, but you could also go to St. Edwards. You could go to Southwestern, which is a Division III public school, part of the Texas public system. Because you're right, there's a ton of UT schools. There's a whole Texas A&M Commerce, West Texas A&M up in Canyon and Amarillo. I mean, super nice school. Uh, and I think there's this gigantic network of places that for a lot of students are amazing. And there's also some really great high academic schools like Davidson in North Carolina, that people don't think of. You know about it because of Steph Curry, but like they've got great students, they've got great teams. I mean, you really need to figure out what your niche is. Like, where are coaches excited about you? And I think that's really uh, what you want to do by reaching out to coaches because everybody's heard of UT, right? But they can only take so many kids. And also, like, they may not be the right, like they may not be the right place for you, you know? Um, Aminata asked about, at an ID camp, what can you do outside of skills and playing to get noticed? I think at an ID camp, the best you're really there to learn about their program. That's what you can really do. I don't think I think trying to get noticed at an ID camp is a unrealistic ask. You need to reach out to the coach ahead of time, make sure you introduce yourself while you're at the camp, and then the question to ask at camp is where do you go to really evaluate players? and get there so they can see you play. Because that's what college coaches want to see you compete against the top possible opposition, because that's how they can figure out where you fit in the, kind of in the world. Um, Casey's asking how much weight is put into extracurricular activities. Uh, the big extracurricular curricular activity for athletes is your sport. If you're really good at your sport, they're not going to ask about like whether you dug a trench in Kenya or something. Like, also, colleges want to see authentic leadership. So what that means is within your community, you have increasing responsibility. So if you play on your team and you move up from the JV to the varsity and you coach the summer camp and work with little kids and put time back and you become a little bit of a leader on that team, that's leadership. That's extracurricular activities. You don't have to go like do some, fly to Africa and feed the hungry or something. That's not, I mean, that's great, but you probably have volunteer stuff through the athletic program at your high school and through your club where you can do service hours that are meaningful and also sort of congruent and make sense within your world. And that's what colleges want to see is an authentic commitment to growth and to leadership. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for if you do fly to Africa and build a well, they know exactly what that means in terms of resources and commitment and everything else. So do something authentic. That's what they like. It is definitely not too late to start as a junior. When you're ready, it's time to get started. And the reality is, if you're looking at really, really high academic, highly selective schools, they start a little bit earlier. Uh, there are colleges in the state of Washington that will recruit right up to the first day of class. So it is never too late. Um, get this one all the time. This is a great question. iPhone, I don't know who this is, says, how does cost uh, athletic or academic money vary from division to division? And the answer is in most sports and for most students, even in football, a student has a market value. And the price you pay in Division Three, Division Two, Division One, going to be pretty close to the same. The difference is if you're a priority recruit in Division One, they can really help you more so than a Division Two or Three school. At D2 or D3, eventually there's still going to be something to pay, but it could be very little. You don't know until you go through the process, get that financial aid pre-read and find out what your price is. Because the truth is colleges negotiate price individually with every student. It's a nutty system, and people complain about it. And all I can tell you is there are colleges that tried to have more transparent pricing, and their enrollment drops by 33% the minute they start trying to do that. So we've met the enemy on this one, and it is us. Everybody wants a deal. Let's see here. Can a first-year student who's played recreational hockey for 9 years try out like a walk-on? Particularly in ice hockey, no. Most of the kids who are recruited, even in Division III hockey, play juniors. There's very little recruiting out of high school. There's a club, a really, really interesting and vibrant club. It's called the ACHA. And ACHA hockey, um, high school kids do go in. There's juniors kids who go to play ACHA, but there's also high school kids who go to those club teams, and you got to pay to play. But it's a lot of fun, and they have a national championship, and it's a big thing. USC has like 3 teams. It's pretty cool. But if you want to play hockey, like you got to play juniors. So that's step two to the process. What are your thoughts about starting a community college? That's a great question from TR, or not from Olivia. Um, and where are we here? Recreational. Anyway, I've lost. I think was it Olivia? Yeah. I just did the NWAC championships, and so it's really exciting to watch some of those kids in soccer. I was doing the TV for them, and it's really fun to watch those kids move on to four-year schools. Um, the issue with community college and transferring is you need to make sure that you start with the end in mind. So you need to make sure that the coursework you take at the 2-year college is going to be transferable to a 4-year college so you don't lose because you can graduate from a 2-year college and not be eligible. And that's not good. You don't want to be in that situation. You want to make sure that the coursework you do, you have sufficient transferable credits and progress to degrees so that you can play as a junior when you transfer. The other thing about community college, if you go because you have a plan, it's great. If you go because you don't have a plan, um, you've bought yourself about 9 months to figure out a plan for what you're going to do after community college. Because with the recruiting process, by the end of your freshman year, you need to be pretty far along figuring out where you're going to transfer. So you have to get the eligibility piece right and do the work yourself to make that plan. You can't trust that the college will just automatically get you in a pipeline to wherever it is you want to go. You've got to take the initiative. And so I worry about kids who go to community college who don't have a plan, kind of end up at a 2-year school. All you did is buy yourself another year but you still got to come up with that plan. If you keep doing what you're doing, you're kind of stuck. So that's the thing about community college. If you come in with a plan, I think it can be a great step. How many years should you be on a varsity high school? You know what? It depends on the situation. Anybody who's playing, I've got one client who didn't make his varsity soccer team, and he's got an 80% scholarship offer from a college, in soccer. So there's no, if you can play, there's a college out there for you. But you got to be willing, but is it a fit academically? Is it a fit, socially? Is it a fit because he's got to go, that college is in Indiana and he's from Seattle. Like not every Seattle kid wants to move to Indiana, especially not to Terre Haute. But he's in. So, you just got to figure it out. And there's no minimum. I've seen, I mean, think of all the guys who play in the NFL that didn't get a offer. Like Josh Allen. I mean, he went through the whole recruiting process, never got an offer, went to junior college, All-American, never got an offer, ended up playing at Wyoming. I mean, like if you want to play, there's a place to play and there's good players doing it.
So Dave, for that, this is Megan. My name is Megan.
Hello.
I'm a soccer player. He's a freshman this year. So for that client that you're just talking about who chose this Indiana school, like was that in his radar already, and then he reached out to the coach and or how did that even?
No, well, he hired me because he was like, I got cut. I don't know what I'm going to do. I want to play in college. I play club at a reasonable level. I'm a pretty good player. And so we got his video together and reached out to schools that I thought would be a good fit, and we found several that were.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. That's good to know. Thank you.
No problem.
I will say there are good donuts in Terre Haute. So,
You're ahead of me. I've been to Terre Haute, but I've never had a donut there.
wagon wheels, yes, they're really good.
There you go. All I remember is walking tacos. Well, anyway, I suggest not eating the walking tacos.
Yeah.
The
Landlocked
meatballs are okay.
states, yeah. All right. Well, we're at an hour. Still, we have 60 people on. If people have more
Yeah,
questions,
if you got one more question, you could help us close it out. I just want to thank everybody. I'm blown away. I wonder how many people turned their phone on and then left it. But anybody who listens to me for an hour, you feel like you should get more pay. And I'm here if you need additional help. We do sustained individual counseling, but I think I always like to talk to anybody I can, because the reality is counting on you guys to be evangelists on this and share the information we went through tonight, with your peers. Because one thing I shared with Panacac was, there's 200,000 kids go to college every year to play sports. I can handle about 100 clients a year, 150 if I really have no life. And that leaves 199,850 kids I can't possibly serve. So we need your help, because there are predatory businesses out there that will really not help you but take your money. And I'd like to help people save their money to pay for college, because it ain't cheap.
one last question here.
Oh, there you go. Hey, you should definitely talk to the coach. You probably don't need an extra day. They'll talk to you for a half an hour. Maybe instead of having a tour with an admissions kid who's pointing at the buildings backwards, talking about whatever, maybe some of the cross-country kids could take your student around and show them the campus. And wouldn't that mean more? But you should definitely. One of the things I hated as a coach is when a kid visited and didn't let me know, because it meant we couldn't really show them what I felt was valuable about the school.